Obese girl won in poker game by cruel father. Mountain man took her, loved her forever. Deal me one last hand, Silas Hartwell slurred, knuckles white around a chipped glass. If I lose, the winner takes my girl. The piano in Blackwood Saloon choked mid-note. Laughter skidded into silence. Lamps hissed. Tobacco smoke hung like a dirty curtain, while men turned to stare at the fool who'd wagered a human life and the crueler fool who might accept. At the back table, 5 players sat beneath a antlered shadow. Coins were gone. The deed to a sagging cottage lay face down. Pride and whiskey were all that bled from Silas now, until he dragged his last secret onto the felt. Aurora Hartwell, Rory, 23, broad-shouldered in her mother's hand-me-down calico, soft as bread and steady as a hearth. A girl who could carry 2 pails and the week's grief without spilling either. Silas called her a burden. The town called her a joke. She called herself invisible. A ripple of ugly chuckles moved through the room. The fat one? Someone snickered near the spittoon. What would a man do with that? Same as with any woman, another rasped. Only more of it. Cards whispered. Boots scraped. Shame flushed Rory's cheeks where she hovered in the doorway, ordered here by a mother too frightened to disobey and a father too drunk to care. If she turned to flee, she knew the laughter would follow her into the street and bite at her heels all the way home. At the table, one player didn't laugh. Tobias Steele set his whiskey down untouched. The mountain had raised him, carved the extra words out of him, taught him that a man's worth is counted in the things he protects. Broad across the shoulders, quiet in the eyes, he had ridden out of the pines for salt, bullets, flour, and solitude. Instead, he found a wager that stank like old blood. "You stake your daughter," he said, voice low as thawing ice, "and you call it sport." Silas grinned a wolf's broken grin. "You in, Steele? Or you scared to win what you can't carry?" Rory swallowed. Her palms were damp. For one wicked heartbeat, she wished someone would win her, anyone, if it meant the laughter stopped and the hunger stopped and the nights of listening to her father's boots crash against furniture stopped. Then the wish curdled. She wasn't a sack of flour. She was a person. She wanted to scream it. She couldn't find breath. Tobias gathered the deck, thumb rough against the cards, and cut once. "One hand," he said. "Winner takes all, and if I win, she leaves as a free woman. No man owns her." The room hissed at the audacity of it. Silas spat. "Deal!" Cards flew, hearts hammered. Somewhere beyond the windows the mountain breathed out a cold wind, as if the pines themselves leaned closer to watch. "Call," Silas croaked, slamming down his final hope. Tobias turned his hand over, slow as sunrise. Silas's grin died. Rory's breath did too, then returned, sharp and sweet, like the first taste of spring. "Get your coat," Tobias said without looking at her father. "You're coming with me." The snow had started to fall when Tobias Steele left the saloon, the girl's soft footsteps trailing behind him. The men inside had gone back to laughing, nervous, hollow laughter, the kind that covers shame. He didn't look back. Aurora Rory Hartwell walked with her head bowed, clutching the threadbare shawl tighter around her shoulders. Every breath left white clouds in the cold. She couldn't believe this was real. One moment her father had called her worthless, and the next a stranger, tall, broad, with the quiet confidence of the wild, had claimed her like a prize. But he hadn't looked at her like she was one, not once. When they reached the edge of town, Tobias stopped beside his horse, a massive black gelding with a coat that shone even under the weak lamplight. He turned to her. "You have a coat?" he asked. She shook her head. "Only this shawl." He frowned, shrugged off his own heavy coat, and draped it over her shoulders. It swallowed her whole, smelling faintly of pine, smoke, and something solid. Safety, maybe. "You'll freeze before we reach the hills," he said. "We'll go by wagon. You'll sit inside." Her voice trembled. "Where are you taking me?" "To my cabin," he said simply. "You'll be safe there." She blinked, tears threatening again. "Why?" He didn't answer at first. He cinched the horse's harness and glanced toward the saloon, the orange glow fading behind them. "Because if I left you there, one of those bastards would have followed you home." His tone softened. "And because no one deserves to be wagered like a coin." They traveled through the night. The road curved upward into the pines, the only sound the creak of the wagon and the muffled cry of an owl. Tobias drove in silence. Aurora sat wrapped in his coat, her hands tucked under her chin, her thoughts spinning in circles. She replayed the look on her father's face when he lost. Not regret, not horror, just anger that the bottle was empty. He hadn't even glanced at her as she left. When dawn crept over the ridge, the sky turned the color of pewter. Aurora spoke for the first time. "You don't have to take me all the way," she said softly. "If you drop me near a town, I'll find work. I can sew or clean or—" Tobias cut her off. "No. No? You've been owned long enough. You'll stay until you decide what you want, not until hunger or fear decides for you." His words were steady, not kind or cruel, simply true, and somehow that truth steadied her more than any promise could have. When they finally reached the ridge, the forest opened to reveal a clearing wrapped in fog. In the center stood a cabin built from thick timber, the chimney sending a thin line of smoke into the gray sky. "This is home," Tobias said, helping her down. Aurora looked around. The place was simple but strong, like him. A stack of split logs leaned against the wall. Tools hung in neat order near the porch. A small corral stood nearby, half buried in snow. Inside, warmth wrapped around her like a blanket. A fire roared in the stone hearth. The air smelled of pine resin and stew. "You'll sleep here," he said, pointing to a small room with a sturdy bed, folded quilts, and a tiny window that looked out on the forest. "The door locks from the inside." She hesitated, touched. You trust me?" "I trust you to be scared," he said, setting his rifle against the wall. "And I trust myself to keep you safe." The blunt honesty of it broke something inside her. "I don't understand you," she whispered. "Most men I know only take. You don't ask for anything." He turned toward the fire. "Maybe I've taken enough for one lifetime." She watched him for a long time, the way he moved, deliberate but gentle, the quiet strength in his shoulders. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like a burden. She felt seen. When she finally lay down that night, she pulled his coat tighter around her and listened to the faint crackle of the fire outside her door. For once, her dreams weren't filled with shouting or fists or shame. They were filled with the sound of the mountain wind whispering like a promise. At dawn, Tobias was already outside splitting wood. Aurora stood by the window, watching his breath rise in clouds. Every swing of the axe was clean, sure, final. She didn't know it yet, but that morning, The first one she woke free was also the morning she began to fall in love. For 2 days, the storm never let up. Wind screamed through the pines, flinging ice against the windows like handfuls of gravel. Tobias and Aurora stayed inside, separated by silence and the glow of the hearth. He fixed the traps, carved new handles for his knives, and kept mostly to himself. Aurora cleaned, mended torn shirts, and tried not to look at him too often, though she did when he wasn't watching. The mountain man moved with quiet precision, every motion purposeful. Even when he wasn't speaking, his presence filled the room, calm, solid, like the heartbeat of the cabin itself. On the third morning, the sky finally broke open. Sunlight spilled over the ridge, making the snow glitter like powdered glass. Tobias packed 2 horses and handed Aurora a heavy coat made of thick fur. "We'll ride out today," he said. "Where are we going?" "Down to the lower valley. There's a stream that doesn't freeze. We'll catch fish and bring back herbs." She hesitated. "You trust me to come back?" His mouth curved slightly, not a smile but close. "If you wanted to run, you'd have done it already." She didn't argue. He was right. There was nowhere else she wanted to go. The trail wound through the trees, sunlight flickering over them. Aurora rode behind Tobias, gripping the saddle horn tightly. The cold air stung her cheeks, but it felt cleaner than anything she'd breathed in years. After a while, Tobias slowed his horse. "You ever ridden before?" "Not really. My father never let me." "Then hold the reins," he said, guiding her hand forward. "Not too tight. The horse needs to feel you, not fight you." His gloved fingers brushed hers, rough, steady, warm. For a heartbeat, everything else disappeared. The cold, the mountain, the memory of the cruel laughter back in Blackwood. All that remained was the quiet between their breaths. She looked up at him. "You're not what I expected." He didn't turn. "And what did you expect?" "Someone who'd gloat, or tell me how lucky I am to belong to him." His voice dropped, quiet, but firm. "You don't belong to anyone, Aurora." Her name on his lips sent a tremor through her chest. No one had said it like that before, not like a curse or a chore, but like a prayer. By noon, they reached the stream. Water rushed through a narrow cut in the rocks, black and silver under the sunlight. Tobias built a small fire while Aurora fetched snow to melt for tea. When he handed her a piece of smoked venison, she took it carefully, her fingers brushing his again. "Thank you," she said. He nodded. "You thank me too much." "I'm not used to kindness," she admitted. He stirred the fire with a stick. "Then you'd better start getting used to it." After they ate, Aurora wandered toward the edge of the stream. Her reflection rippled, round face, wind-reddened cheeks, eyes that still looked uncertain. She bent to touch the water, but the current was stronger than it seemed. Her foot slipped on the icy rock. Before she could fall, a firm hand caught her by the waist. Tobias pulled her upright with ease, his breath close against her ear. "Careful," he said. Her heart thudded. I'm sorry." He didn't let go right away. For one long second, the world stood still, her hand against his chest, his warmth bleeding through her coat. Then he stepped back. "No harm done," he said, voice rougher than before. She nodded, cheeks burning. "Thank you." He gave a small grunt, as if the words meant more than he could handle, and turned away to tend the fire. They started home as dusk fell. Snowflakes drifted again, soft and lazy. The woods glowed blue in the fading light. Aurora was exhausted, but the silence between them had changed, no longer heavy, but companionable. Halfway up the ridge, she spoke softly. "You said you knew what it was like, being betrayed by family." He didn't answer right away. Then quietly, "I lost mine. Years ago." "I'm sorry." He nodded once. "It's the kind of loss you stop talking about, but never stop carrying." They rode in silence after that, but she could feel the weight of his words. Not bitterness, not despair, but something gentler. Survival. When they reached the cabin, she helped him unpack the horses. He looked at her for a long moment. "You did well today?" The simple praise made her chest tighten. "I just followed your lead." "That's what makes a good partner," he said. Partner. The word stayed with her long after she went to bed. That night, Aurora couldn't sleep. The wind whispered against the roof, and every sound of the house reminded her that she wasn't alone. From the next room came the soft scrape of Tobias stoking the fire. She thought of his steady hands, his quiet voice, the way he'd said her name by the stream, and in that moment she realized something that frightened her even more than the night she'd been wagered away. She didn't want to leave. Not now. Not ever. Winter held the mountain in its frozen grip. Outside, wind howled through the pines like a chorus of ghosts. Inside, the cabin burned with the warmth of a small, steady life. Aurora learned the rhythm of Tobias Steele's days: sunrise chores, quiet meals, the soft rasp of his axe, splitting logs, the deep calm that always followed his presence. He was not a man of many words, but every movement spoke for him. She rose before dawn to tend the fire, wrapped in his oversized coat. By the time he came in from the cold, the smell of coffee and biscuits would already fill the air. He'd nod his thanks, that quiet, almost shy nod that said more than a dozen compliments could. One morning, as she kneaded bread at the table, she caught him watching her from the doorway. "What is it?" she asked, wiping flour from her cheek. He shrugged slightly. "You look different." "Different how?" "Like you belong here." She turned back to the dough to hide her blush. "Maybe I do," he smiled, just a shadow of one, but it reached his eyes. In the weeks that followed, the walls of the cabin seemed to breathe with life. Aurora began to hum while she worked, soft, half-remembered tunes her mother used to sing before the drinking and shouting drowned them out. Sometimes Tobias would pause in the middle of chopping wood, head tilted toward the window, listening. He never said anything, but the faintest warmth lingered on his face when he came inside afterward. He built her a small shelf near the hearth for her sewing things, and she made new curtains out of an old blanket. Slowly, the cabin stopped looking like a place to hide and started feeling like a home. When she laughed for the first time, really laughed, the sound ringing out clear and startled, Tobias froze. He had forgotten what laughter sounded like when it wasn't cruel. "What?" she said, cheeks flushed. "Nothing," he murmured, eyes soft. "Just good to hear." One evening, after supper, a storm rolled down the ridge. Rain hammered the roof, and the fire snapped high in the hearth. Tobias sat sharpening his hunting knife, while Aurora patched a tear in his coat. She pricked her finger and hissed quietly. He looked up immediately. "You all right?" "It's just a needle." She smiled, shaking her head. "You act like I got shot." "Blood's blood," he said, setting his knife aside. "Let me see." Before she could protest, he took her hand in his, large, rough, gentle. His thumb brushed over the tiny red spot, his touch light enough to make her pulse stumble. "It's fine," she whispered. "Still," he said softly, eyes lifting to hers, "I don't like seeing you hurt." The silence between them deepened. His hand lingered in hers a second too long. Then he released her, clearing his throat. "You should get some rest. Storm'll last all night." Aurora tried to speak, but words failed her. She turned back to the coat, needle trembling slightly between her fingers. Outside, thunder rolled, distant and low, as if the mountain itself was listening. Days turned into weeks. They moved like two stars caught in the same orbit, never colliding, always circling closer. He taught her how to mend traps, how to build a fire even in snow, how to read the sky. She taught him how to make stew that didn't taste like ashes, and how to patch his shirts so the seams wouldn't chafe. Sometimes she caught him staring at her hands as she worked, not with desire, but with quiet reverence, as though the very act of her being alive was something sacred. And sometimes, late at night, when the cabin was wrapped in darkness, she'd hear him stirring by the fire. She'd think of his loneliness, the stories he hadn't told, and her heart would ache with something too tender to name. One evening, she found him sitting by the window, staring out at the falling snow. "You miss them," she said quietly. He nodded once. "Every day. Your wife. And my son." Aurora hesitated, then moved to sit beside him. "What were they like?" His gaze softened. "She laughed like you, and he had her kindness." Aurora swallowed. "I'm sorry." He looked at her, eyes full of a sorrow that had learned to live inside him. "Don't be. Some things don't fade. They just make room for new things." She reached for his hand, unsure, trembling, and this time he didn't pull away. The next morning, the snow finally stopped. Sunlight streamed through the window, filling the cabin with gold. Aurora stood by the door, watching the light dance on the frost. Tobias came up behind her, close enough that she could feel his warmth. "Pretty?" she said softly. "Yeah," he murmured. "It is." When she turned, his eyes weren't on the snow. Her breath caught. He took one step closer, then another, until there was nothing between them but the space of a heartbeat. His hand rose slowly, stopping just before it reached her cheek. "You're trembling," he said. "So are you," she whispered. And they were. Two souls, bruised and cautious, standing on the edge of something vast and terrifying and beautiful. But Tobias let his hand fall. "Not yet," he said quietly. "You deserve to choose, not out of fear or gratitude, but when you're ready." Aurora's throat tightened. "And if I never am?" He smiled, small and steady. "Then I'll keep waiting." That night, Aurora lay awake, listening to the fire crackle, her heart full and aching all at once. She thought of how he'd looked at her, not with hunger, but with patience. Not like a man claiming what was his, but like one who finally found something worth protecting. And in the dark, she realized she'd already chosen. The snow melted slowly, giving way to mud and early shoots of green. For the first time in months, the valley breathed again. Aurora spent her mornings hanging laundry in the breeze and her afternoons gathering herbs near the stream. The world had softened, and so had her heart. But peace in the mountains was fragile, and fate never forgot its debts. It began one morning when Tobias came back from the trading post later than usual. His horse was sweating hard, his jaw tight. Aurora ran out to meet him, but the look on his face stopped her cold. "What happened?" she asked. He dismounted slowly, eyes scanning the ridge as though expecting company. "Your father's in town." Her blood ran cold. "My father?" "He's been bragging about the game," Tobias said grimly, "telling folks how he won you back." Aurora's stomach twisted. "But how? He lost that night. He told them the bet wasn't legal because you weren't property." Tobias spat the word like poison. "Says he plans to collect you anyway. He's been drinking and flashing money, bought himself friends who don't care what's right." Aurora's knees nearly gave out. "He's coming here?" Tobias's voice softened. "If he does, he'll have to come through me first." That night, Tobias cleaned his rifle and checked the locks. Aurora sat by the fire, her hands shaking. "I should leave," she whispered. "He's only after me. If I go, he'll leave you alone." He looked up sharply. "Don't say that." "It's true. I can't let him ruin what you built here. I can't—" He crossed the room in 2 strides and took her hands. "Aurora, you don't owe that man anything. He lost the right to call himself your father the night he gambled you away." Tears welled in her eyes. "He's still my blood." "Blood doesn't make family," Tobias said quietly. "Love does. Choice does." She looked into his eyes and saw the unshakable truth there, the same truth that had carried her through the mountains and into safety. "Then what should we do?" "Wait," he said, "and be ready." 2 days later, the storm came, not from the sky, but from the road. Tobias was chopping wood when he heard the first shout. He turned to see 3 riders cresting the ridge. Silas Hartwell in front, face flushed with whiskey and arrogance, flanked by 2 men with rifles slung low. Aurora appeared at the door, pale and trembling. "Get inside," Tobias said softly. "Lock the door." She obeyed, but didn't move far. Silas dismounted, stumbling forward. "Well, well," he sneered, "the mountain man who thinks he's better than me." Tobias didn't move. "You shouldn't have come here." Silas laughed, a cruel sound. "I've come for what's mine, my daughter. You think you can keep her? She's my blood, and I'll have her back, or I'll have your land instead." "This land's mine," Tobias said evenly, "and Aurora stays here if she wants." "She doesn't want anything," Silas snapped. "She does what she's told." At that, the cabin door opened. Aurora stepped out, her voice shaking but steady. "No, Father, I don't." Silas froze, surprised by the steel in her tone. "You watch your mouth, girl." "I'm not your girl," she said. "You lost me the night you threw me on a table for a handful of cards." The men beside Silas laughed nervously, sensing the shift in power. Tobias moved forward, placing himself between her and them. "You heard her," Tobias said. "Now leave." Silas's face twisted with rage. "You think you can take my daughter and talk down to me? You think you can tell me what's right?" He reached for the pistol on his belt, but Tobias was faster. The crack of his rifle shattered the air. A splinter of wood exploded near Silas's boot. "Next shot won't miss," Tobias said quietly. The other men froze. Silas looked from the smoking rifle barrel to Tobias's steady gray eyes and saw something there that drained the fight from him. Not anger, but certainty. "You'll regret this," Silas hissed, backing away. "You'll both regret it." He mounted his horse, fury burning in his drunken face, and rode off down the ridge. His men followed without a word. When the sound of hooves finally faded, Aurora sank to her knees. Tobias lowered the rifle and crouched beside her, his hand resting on her shoulder. "It's over," he said softly, but she shook her head. "He'll come back. He always does." Tobias didn't answer right away. He pulled her into his arms, feeling her heartbeat thundering against his chest. "Then he'll find we're not easy to break." That night, the fire burned low, and neither of them could sleep. Aurora sat wrapped in a blanket, staring into the flames. "When I was little," she said quietly, "I used to think if I was thinner, quieter, better, he might love me, but it was never enough." Tobias reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "He's too small a man to see the worth of anyone." She looked up at him, eyes glistening. "You see it?" "I see you," he said simply. The tears came then, not from fear, but release. Years of shame and silence poured out until she was shaking in his arms. He held her without speaking, his rough hands cradling her face like something fragile and holy. When she finally looked up, her voice was barely a whisper. "You saved me twice now." He shook his head. "You saved yourself. I just made sure you had the chance." By dawn, the first light spilled through the frosted window, catching on the tears that still clung to her lashes. Tobias stirred the fire, then turned to her. "I'll ride down to town tomorrow," he said. "Make sure your father's really gone." "I want to come with you," Aurora said, surprising herself. He studied her for a long moment. "You're not afraid anymore?" She smiled softly. "Not while I'm with you." But the mountain wasn't done testing them. When Tobias rode down the ridge the next morning, he found the trading post half burned, the air thick with smoke and whispers. Silas Hartwell had been found dead near the river, shot once through the chest, and someone, somewhere, had left behind a playing card pinned to his coat, the Queen of Hearts. Tobias stood there a long time, the cold wind cutting through his coat. He didn't speak when he returned home, but Aurora knew something had changed. She saw it in the way he looked at her, not with fear, but with a strange, solemn acceptance. Some debts, it seemed, had finally been paid. The day Tobias brought back the news of Silas Hartwell's death, the mountains seemed quieter than ever. The wind had died, the trees stood still, and even the stream below the ridge ran more softly, as if nature itself were holding its breath. Aurora sat on the porch, fingers trembling around a cup of tea gone cold. When Tobias finally spoke, his voice was low and measured. "He's gone," he said. "Your father, someone shot him near the river." Her lips parted, but no sound came out. She set the cup down carefully, afraid it might shatter in her hands. "You're sure?" He nodded. "The sheriff's men found him, shot clean through the heart." Silence hung between them, thick and heavy. For a long moment, Aurora stared out at the horizon, the weight of years pressing down. "I should feel angry," she whispered, "or relieved, or something." "What do you feel?" She swallowed hard. "Empty, like he already died a long time ago, the day he stopped being my father." Tobias moved closer, crouching in front of her so their eyes met. "Then let him stay gone." She looked up at him, searching his face. "You don't think I had anything to do with it, do you?" He shook his head immediately. "No. I know you, Aurora. You couldn't pull a trigger on anyone, even him." She managed a weak smile. "But someone did." Tobias hesitated. The truth was, he had his suspicions. Silas had too many enemies, too many debts unpaid. The card found on his chest, the Queen of Hearts, could have been a message or maybe just fate playing its final game. He reached for her hand. It doesn't matter who did it. What matters is it's over now. You're free. The word free trembled in the air between them. Aurora looked down at their joined hands, his calloused fingers warm and sure, hers soft and uncertain. Free, she repeated softly. I've never been that before. You are now. That night, Tobias didn't light the fire right away. The cabin glowed only with the soft gold of the lantern, flickering across the wooden walls. Aurora stood by the window, watching snowflakes drift in the dark. "Do you believe people can change?" she asked quietly. He looked up from his chair. "Some can. Some just find out who they really were all along." She turned to face him. "Then maybe this is who I was meant to be. Not the girl who was traded away, but the woman who stayed." He rose from the chair, the floor creaking softly under his boots. "You stayed because you wanted to?" "Yes," she said, her voice trembling but certain, "because you made me believe I could." He took a slow breath and crossed the room. When he stopped before her, the lantern light caught the faint silver in his beard, the warmth in his eyes. "You know," he murmured, "I used to think love was something I'd buried with them. Clara and Benjamin. I told myself the mountain was enough. The quiet, the solitude." He reached out, brushing his thumb along her jaw. "Then you walked into my life, and suddenly the silence felt lonely again." Aurora's breath hitched. "Toby." He smiled faintly, that quiet, unguarded smile she'd come to crave. "You don't have to say anything. Just tell me this. Do you want to stay?" She took his hand and pressed it to her heart. "I don't want to be anywhere else." He leaned down, and this time there was no hesitation. The kiss was slow, deep, the kind that felt like coming home after years lost in the cold. When they finally broke apart, the world outside had gone utterly still. The next morning, dawn spilled gold across the valley. Aurora stood on the porch, wrapped in a wool shawl, watching Tobias chop wood. Every swing of the axe sent a pulse of warmth through her chest, not from desire, but from peace. When he noticed her watching, he set the axe aside and walked over, wiping his hands on his sleeve. "You're quiet today," he said. She smiled softly. "I'm listening." "To what?" "The sound of belonging." He looked at her for a long moment, then pulled her into his arms. The scent of pine and smoke filled the space between them. "You're safe here," he murmured. "It's your home now, if you'll have it." Aurora closed her eyes, tears catching on her lashes. "It already is." And as the mountain breathed around them, steady, eternal, the ghosts of the past slipped quietly into the snow. What remained was warmth, and the promise of a new life built not from fear or debt, but from choice. Spring came slow to the mountain. Ice loosened its hold on the streams, and the air began to smell of wet earth and pine needles. Inside the cabin, sunlight fell across the wooden floor, warming the worn rugs Aurora had stitched from scraps. Life had settled into a gentle rhythm. Tobias rose early to hunt or mend fences. Aurora tended to the small garden she had planted by the porch. Beans, wild onions, and marigolds pushed through the soil, fragile but determined. Some days they didn't speak much. They didn't have to. The quiet between them had changed. It wasn't distance anymore, but comfort. When Tobias returned from the woods, she would always have a pot of stew waiting. When she hummed while she worked, he would glance up from his carving with the smallest of smiles. One afternoon, as the sun dipped behind the ridge, Aurora stood by the fence watching the mist gather over the trees. "Do you ever miss the world down there?" she asked. Tobias leaned against the post beside her. "Not the noise of it. Maybe the people, sometimes." She looked at him. "Do you ever miss who you were before?" He thought for a long time before answering. "No, I think I finally found who I was meant to be." She smiled faintly. "So did I." That night, rain began to fall, a soft, rhythmic sound on the roof. Aurora sat at the table, a small book open before her. It was an old journal Tobias had given her, its pages yellowed but blank. She dipped the pen in ink and began to write. "I was once a wager in a game. I thought my life ended that night. But somewhere between the river and the ridge, I was given back to myself." Tobias watched her from the doorway. "What are you writing?" "Our story," she said, smiling. "I don't want it to be forgotten." He walked over, brushed his hand across her hair. "It won't be. Not while we're still living it." Weeks later, the first wildflowers bloomed along the stream. Aurora and Tobias spent the morning gathering them, filling the cabin with color and scent. The mountain seemed alive again, as if blessing their fragile peace. As evening fell, Tobias lit the lantern and sat beside her on the porch. Below them, the valley glowed gold beneath the sinking sun. "Do you ever wonder what comes next?" she asked softly. He looked out toward the horizon. "Maybe the mountain will tell us when it's ready." Aurora rested her head against his shoulder. "Then I'll wait with you." The wind rose gently, carrying the scent of rain and pine. Inside the cabin, the fire burned low. Outside, the stars began to appear one by one. They sat together in silence, two souls once lost, now found, not knowing what the future would bring, only that they would face it side by side. And somewhere beyond the ridge, where the sound of the stream met the sky, the mountain whispered its timeless promise, "You are home." Every time I tell a story like this, I'm reminded that love isn't always found in grand places. It's born quietly, in cabins, in kindness, in the moments when two broken souls choose each other despite everything. Aurora and Tobias began as a wager, but ended as a promise that even after pain, gentleness can still bloom. If this story reached your heart tonight, tell me, where in the world are you listening from? And if you still believe in second chances, in love that heals instead of hurts, don't leave. The next story will be waiting for you.